Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. And today I'm delighted to talk to Dr. Sadeq Ansari. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, Ustaz Paul.
Great to see you. Dr. Sadeq Ansari is an academic in the field of Hadith studies and is currently teaching with Charles Sturt University in Australia, where you are at the moment. And it's late at night in Australia, and it's just midday here in London. And he's also currently working on a unique Sirah project called Sirah Hub. We're going to come to that in a minute. He's taken Arabic, Quran, and Islamic studies in Egypt, Turkey, and the USA. And he's taught tertiary level Islamic studies both in Australia and the USA. His doctoral dissertation was on the role and rules of aql, reason, in text criticism of Hadith by the famous polymath Abu Jafar Tahawi. He's originally from Afghanistan, and Sadeq is a regular Blogging Theology listener from Sydney in Australia. So thank you very much for coming on today. This is going to be a very interesting podcast, I think, because you're involved in some very pioneering research into the Sirah, the life of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace. And can you tell us a bit about that and why it's so fascinating, and that the research you're doing is very innovative? So could you just introduce us to what you and your colleagues are doing?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Paul, by the way. I've benefited a lot, and I'll actually quote some of your interviews you've had with other Sirah scholars, particularly one with Professor Joel Hayward.
Oh, yes.
And that's connected to this research. After I finished my PhD, I got introduced to this project. I had known of it before, but I started working for them, and basically this project is based on the philosophy of what else can we find out about the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How can it be more applicable today?
Right.
Do we have all the information in our current Sirah books? Can we get more books? How can we use the Sirah more as a map to guide us with ethical and moral issues or any problems that modernity throws at us? And so, but although it's very academic based, but it also has an application focus as well, how we can apply it to our lives. And so the belief of the project was really, I think, it's that the beauty lies in the detail, as opposed to what we normally know of that saying, right? So they said the devil's in the details. The beauty of the Sirah is in the details, and perhaps there's a lot of beauty that we can capture. Now, our Sirah, may Allah, like Imam Shafi says, may Allah bless the Salaf scholars, because they've left so much work to do for the later on scholars. We really thank for all the scholarship in Islamic history. They've captured Sirah so well, but sometimes the attention may have been more on particularly matters that were relevant to the times when the Sirah books were written. Perhaps, for example, let's say wars and battles. They took a far larger share of attention. Now, those battles are very significant. I'm not trying to reduce its significance, but the amount of actual battle time in the life of the Prophet ﷺ is very limited. And there are so many things happening outside of that as well. And so this project is trying to get everything as much as we can to fill in the gaps. So if the Prophet's life, ﷺ, was, I've heard numbers like his blessed 23 years of prophethood, that would be some 8,000 days. The current Sirah literature we have only covers up to like 50 to 60 days of information.
Wow.
There's a whole many hundreds and thousands of days that we actually don't have information about, or at least it's not in our popular Sirah books. Yeah, so this is sort of the background of the project.
Yeah. So why is there a need to go beyond the normal sources for Sirah? Because I think that's what you are doing. You're really looking in new, innovative, interesting areas.
Yeah. So the project was, and here, this is where I'll mention Professor Joel Hayward, and thanks to this series, Blogging Theology, I remember listening to one of his podcasts last year. And in fact, after that is when I got in contact with Professor Joel, and we've been in touch since then. He gave an example that, and he's as a professor in Sirah, his works are quite famous. He gave an example that many things that are so important in Sirah it's not found. So, for example, when the Prophet migrates to Medina, the leaders of the Ansar, the Khazraj tribe, they gift all the land of Medina that was not irrigated to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's a very important piece of information, but it's not captured in the, Ibn Hisham, Ibn Ishaq's history books. So just like that, our Islamic sciences, they're really very intricate and complicated, like hadith sciences. However, we haven't really had a bit of or perhaps let's say this interdisciplinary approach, which is very popular these days, that needs to also take place when it comes to the Sirah. So a lot of information that's in the hadith sources, and I've spoken to some of the leading hadith scholars, and when I've told them about this project, they said this is exactly what we've been dreaming of. So information that's there in the hadith or in the commentaries of hadith, that information about the Prophet's life or the companions are not found in Sirah books.
Interesting.
And so, yeah.
So, I mean, can you give examples where information can be found in hadith books but not in the Sirah books? What information are we talking about?
Okay, just a few examples. Let's say there's this famous incident, the Prophet after the conquest of Khaybar. There's an incident with two Jewish people from different tribes commit fornication. So the leaders of them invite the Prophet ﷺ, and they say, what should the judgment be? And it's a famous incident, and the Prophet asks, what's the ruling in the Torah? And they give another ruling, and it's not really shown. But in Abu Dawood, for example, it mentions that the Prophet ﷺ, when the Torah was brought in, and when he entered they called Bayt I forgot the Arabic term, Midash, the word for like a synagogue or a madrasa of the Jewish community of in Khaybar. When he welcomed there, they gave him like a soft cushion thing to sit on.
Yes.
When the Torah was brought in, he got off his position, off his blessed sitting place, and he placed the Torah on that, and he himself sat on dry land. So a fine detail, but these things are significant. Another one that we found was when the companions of the Prophet were going to the final pilgrimage, they went past an injured antelope, almost like a deer. And the Prophet ﷺ appointed one companion to look after that antelope. And when I was speaking to one of the researchers who's been involved in this research for like 10 years, he said, I knew of this incident, but I never knew who that companion was. And then in one narration,
who was the companion?
And so in one of the narrations, it states explicitly that the Prophet appointed Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu.
Abu Bakr himself.
Abu Bakr himself. So to stand by the injured antelope so that the whole army goes past and this antelope is not further injured. Now, it's a small detail, but the significance that it speaks to us really changes. You can just see how much the significance based on the significant companion the Prophet appoints. So a lot of, like I said, beauty lies in the details. We really comes out through these details.
It's the beauty in the details. It's the other way around, as you say. And then Abu Bakr, because he was one of the great original caliphs of Islam, very senior companion of the Prophet, and he was assigned to do what some people might think was a relatively minor task, but it signifies the importance of caring for animals that are injured or vulnerable. And this is the Sunnah of the Prophet upon him be peace. So this is something that we must imitate as well, our care for our animals, whether they be pets or animals in the world. So they're just very significant.
Well, speaking of pets, since I've been involved in this project, and let me just make it clear, I've done a PhD in Hadith studies, so I'm not really, to be very honest, a Sirah expert, but I'm working on this project, and I'm organizing a conference where we're inviting experts. But I came across a narration that I never knew, that the wife of the Prophet, Maymuna, radiallahu anha, she had a pet dog called Mismar. And she went to Hajj with this pet dog, and she would spend on it and feed it. And even people would be afraid to approach her caravan because of the dog. And it says that when her dog died, she really cried a lot. And she said, Fuji'atu bi Mismar. I've been really tested and, I've overcome with grief because of Mismar. Little details like this, for me personally, it was the first time I was hearing it. There was another example I would share, again, from Hadith sources. where the companion Bilal radiallahu anhu, where a woman in Medina, she had the highest house. She said Bilal used to always come to my house and wait for Fajr time to give the adhan.
Wow.
And when he was coming, every time before he gave the adhan, he would make this following dua. I'll just see if I can quickly find it and read it. Oh, I don't know where my notes message. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Allahumma inni ahmaduka wa asta'inuka ala Qurayshin an yuqimu dinak. Oh Allah, I praise you and I seek your help so that you help Quraysh enter into Islam so they can establish your religion. And she says, I never heard him one day not say this dua.
So this is Bilal, the great Muezzin, the
Bilal,
like prayer in Islam.
Calling to, now you could imagine someone who's been tortured so much by the people of Quraysh, yet praying for them to enter into Islam, and then also so Islam grows, and he's doing it this is like a daily habit of his. And she hears this. This is her house. She hears him climb her house, give the adhan, but say this dua before the adhan. So little things like this that I personally have come across by it really. Again, beauty lies in the detail, and there's a lot of aspects.
Little human color, little detail there really gives flesh color to that period. But I've got to ask these a couple of questions because I know people will ask in the comments, and I want to ask them as well. The two earlier hadiths. So you mentioned one where the Prophet, upon peace, was sitting on a nice cushion, and he got off it and placed the Torah on this cushion, and so that. People might be thinking, so the Torah itself is being venerated, the status of it is being acknowledged, but what does that say about the Prophet's attitude towards that Torah in terms of its integrity, its reliability, its truthfulness? Is it thereby implied that everything in that Torah is absolutely the same Torah that went back to the Prophet Moses upon his peace, or is that an overstatement that there's something else is happening here? As a hadith scholar, how would you interpret that incident in terms of the caveats? Because the Quran has sometimes a polemical relationship with the Torah. I think we can give examples. So, what do you think is going on there, really, in that kind of very symbolic act?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely shows us that the essence, that if we go back to the basics, that the book is ultimately from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Torah, the Injil, the Furqan, as the Quran mentions, and the Prophet showing his reverence and the Prophet ﷺ, Imam Tahawi often speaks about this, that when there was no matter revealed upon him, he would rather imitate the Ahli Kitab, the people of the book, instead of the mushrik, the polytheist Arabs, because Imam Tahawi always quotes that verse, فَبِهُدَاهُ مُقْتَدِهِ. So follow with their guidance, according to this verse of the Quran, referring to the previous prophets. Of course, however, if a new revelation came that had to change it, then he'll go against it and try not to resemble them. But if he had a choice of polytheist Quraysh Meccan practice or Ahli Kitab practice, according to Imam Tahawi, he would prefer the Ahli Kitab, people of the books practice. But I'm not an expert about this Torah or its authenticity around the time. But here we definitely, in this incident, the Prophet asked for the Torah. He asks for the ruling in the Torah. Obviously, the Quran is clear that tahrif, changing, has taken place, and so that we can't, that's a reality. Now, maybe acknowledging the changes taking place does not prevent us from respecting that book, overall. Perhaps is one thing that we can lesson.
Water, so to speak. We're still venerating a book that contains revelation, God's word. It may not be completely perfect, and so on. Okay, my second question is to do with that beautiful little story, that vignette of the companion, the sister who had a pet dog, and of course we know that in the Sharia. We're not supposed to have pet dogs in our homes, if you like. We can certainly own. There's a misunderstanding here amongst some non-Muslims. Oh, we can't have dogs at all. It's not true, but you can have dogs as like guard dogs for security, for hunting purposes, and so on. But the word pet dog, which you use, suggests something more close and intimate than that. What's going on then? How do we understand that within the broader Sharia context, do you think?
These are the type of conversations we need to be having. So what do we do with this information?
Yep.
How does it affect our rulings, fiqh? But how does it affect our attitudes, our ways of thinking, particularly as Muslims living in the West? Because we're not living in a Muslim majority society. And I'm just using your question to answer a broader question.
Yep.
You know, most of Islamic history, and this is my personal opinion, our scholars lived under Muslim rulership. And everything was Islamic around them. They never ventured off and lived in, you know, the abode of Darul Harb or non-Muslims, you know. Right. We're living in a world where we are living in that. So, but however, the companions' lives, particularly the Meccan phase, actually resembles our lives much more than sometimes Islamic, the bulk of the 1400-year Islamic history. So sometimes it's really worth it to go to the Sirah to look for fresh answers. Now, of course, I'm not saying we do away with our tradition and scholarship and fiqh, and this is something where scholars need to analyze. However, there is a lot of merit and benefit in always looking for fresh perspectives, given our new circumstances that as Muslims we find ourselves, particularly in the West. And yes, the dog issue is one that there's been a lot of. The pet dog wording was my translation. The Arabic just said she had a dog, so maybe that was my thing. But you can see from her affection and her crying over it that she had a close connection to it.
So she could have actually had a dog that wasn't perhaps a pet dog. No, you've clarified that, which was a guard dog, and you know, within the usual Sharia parameters that she was just very fond of. I mean, dogs can be very affectionate creatures, perhaps. So there's a nuance there which maybe we can't penetrate through time now, 1,400 years ago. But no, it's fascinating. Example.
One of the other reasons why, so for example, an information like this or the dua that I quoted before of Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, these type of information sometimes maybe authors did not see it as significant to add to the Prophet's life. But let's say if you're the companion or the children of the companion and you're narrating the hadith or you're mentioning your father, you'll say, well, I'm the son of that person who lost that finger in battle. And then there was a miracle of the Prophet that displayed. Yeah. So for the companions, individual companions, there's a lot of significance and it gets recorded under their life stories. So this goes to the tabaqat type literature. So this project that has been going on for more than 10 years, it started in Cairo in Egypt. They said, let's capture anything that could be written relevant to the life of the Prophet, whether it's in fiqh, books of law. And as we know, it's not just the 4 madahib, but there's also commentaries and commentaries. Let's look at hadith. Let's even look at all fields like theology works, even books of Arabic dictionary. But Arabic dictionaries are a bit different. When you look at the classical dictionaries, they sometimes, to give an explanation of a word, they quote a hadith of the Prophet or a verse of the Quran. So there's the Islamic information in all these sources. So they said they sort of put a rough timeline of the first 500 years. And they said initially they set out to collect 1,000 books, and this was before the ChatGPT era. So they came up with specific criteria. Every time any biographical data is mentioned, any person is mentioned, any timing is mentioned, because sometimes you have 2 separate narrations. The reader does not know they're actually connected. Right? They're connected. So by you finding this narration, bringing them together across all these sources, sometimes it just adds light to an event that's already known, but it just gives better context or contextual light to it. And so, yeah, so this it was carried out by a team of scholars in Egypt, mainly graduates from Azhar, and they were distributed these books. And in the history of the project, the researchers tell me that initially they were not expecting much information to come out from fiqh books. Yeah. But after the first 1,000 books, they decided to expand it much more, and they were getting a lot of information. Really? Because, for example, the fiqh books have to deal with is a matter, particularly in, let's say, in the Hanafi law, Hanafi fiqh books, is something abrogated or not abrogated. Nasakh and mansukh. Sometimes a lot of the rulings change. So naturally, you fall into a discussion on the Sirah. Like I remember reading Tahawi, just from my own PhD days, for example, whether animal gut or animal intestines, does that break the wudu of someone or not? Wow. And so Imam Tahawi quotes incidents where the Prophet was in Mecca prostrating, and when camel intestines were put on top of him.
Wow.
To use that, look, he continued his prayer.
Right.
That's just an example where Imam Tahawi had no intention of having a seerah discussion. But that's, if that information especially is not in our seerah books, well, it's very valuable information. And I had one example to share like that. For example, Ibn Qudama, if I'm not mistaken, is a famous Hanbali scholar. In his book, while he's talking about the chapter of wudu, taking ablution, he mentions a narration that, you know, every time a person would leave his house, some of his enemies would follow him, throwing rocks and making him bleed.
Wow.
But he's only including that discussion because the context is on bleeding, whether that breaks wudu or not. But when you look at it from the angle of, does this give me valuable information on the life of the Prophet? Well, it does. And sometimes, a lot of the times, these type of details are not in our normal seerah books. And there are hundreds of these. These are just some examples to give from different.
We want to hear more, actually, because this is so. These vignettes, they're like little time capsules, where very vivid, like the woman and the sister and her dog, and the cushion with the Quran. Now the Prophet, upon him be peace. It's horrible to hear it, but being attacked in that horrible way, and bleeding. These are very, very vivid examples, and gosh, what can one say about them? But do you have other examples of information that can be found in Hadith books, but not in the Sirah books? And that's the whole point, isn't it?
That's right. The things that are found in Hadith, or in this example I gave was from a fiqh book.
Yes.
Look, right now I'm in touch with many of the scholars who's presenting in our upcoming conference, and we can talk about that. But for example, one of the presenters is going to be presenting on Hani, the Prophet's cousin. Now she's the eldest sister of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, the Prophet's son-in-law. Now the Prophet, according to sources, proposes to her before Islam. But Abu Talib doesn't give her to him.
That's right.
And the reason he gives, from what I read, was, we've married our children to someone else from another tribe. Now it's our turn to give someone to them. So just looking at the details of Hani, like from some of the data that this research provided, was I found many things I'd never come across personally. And I'm not an expert on her, but for example. It's quoted that she had some of the rocks in her house, that the rocks that were sent in the elephant incident, where the Abraha, the king, came to destroy the Kaaba, and then God sends in Surah Fil these birds with these rocks. I apologize. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends these birds with these rocks, and she had some of these rocks in her house, according to some narrations. And then, speaking of Hani, when did she actually become Muslim? Now, the official sources say she would become Muslim after the conquest of Mecca.
Right.
Yet, there are clear narrations. In fact, when the Prophet went to Miraj, the night ascension, according from one narration, it was based from her house. Another narration says from Kaaba, and in that narration, she clearly says, we prayed Isha with the Prophet ﷺ, and then when he came back, we prayed Fajr, the morning prayer, with him. And she actually pleads for the Prophet ﷺ not to go out and tell the Quraysh about his night journey to Jerusalem, because she says they will belie you. So yes, it has been said she's become Muslim later on, but this is something serious scholars, I'm sure, are well aware. Many companions, like Abbas, the Prophet's uncle, exactly when they become Muslim, it's a bit of a question mark. Some of them formally or officially become Muslim, let's say around the time of the conquest, but it appears that perhaps they may have been Muslim much earlier on.
Yeah,
so these are just some.
Yeah, they might have secretly believed, but because of the persecution and so on, they might have had to keep it hidden.
And even the Quran points to this explicitly in Surah Fath, that there are people in Mecca who believed, but they had not announced their faith for various reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me, on a slightly different context, Abdul Hakim Moran, Tim Winter in Cambridge, in an interview on Blogging Theology and elsewhere, talking about what he calls submarines. This is his term, by the way, submarines. These are people in public life, say in Britain. In one case in Downing Street, he knew someone who was a Muslim, but for various pressing reasons, they're not able to make it public. So he calls them submarines. So they're just beneath the surface. Now, this is not meant to be a sinister thing. This is simply because their position and other factors make it very difficult indeed for them to make public, which is a very innocent thing, that they simply are Muslim. Now, obviously, that situation is nothing like the persecution the companions suffered in Mecca, but there is one end of the spectrum. So it's similar.
And when we look at Sirah, we find incidents like this. Even the king of Abyssinia, like,
yes,
when did he really become Muslim? Even other leaders, they show a lot of sympathy. Perhaps there were people that they could not explicitly announce their faith. And in our lives today, as Muslims in a minority in the West, we might face more situation. It's a reminder not to judge people quickly. Maybe it's also a reminder not everyone has to quickly change their name and reveal their identity and announce it on social media.
I'm aware of another scholar, and I won't say any more than that because I don't want to give their identity away, who I'm being told is a Muslim, but publicly they are not. I'll say no more than that, but they are very prominent. But I won't say any more than that because I don't want to. But yeah, it's very. So you mentioned very briefly there a conference that you're attending or participating in. Can you tell us a bit more about that and when it's happening?
Yeah, so now that this data collection phase or filtering, they've filtered more than 4,000 Arabic volumes of text to gather as much data. And again, I remind everyone that this was done before the ChatGPT era. Now that has completed, they've got Word documents. They've fed this data into a searchable engine. And now we can put a word in, and based on that, like we put Hani, and based on Hani's name, I got almost, if I'm not mistaken, 200 entries.
Wow.
About her. Obviously, there are repetitions. So we decided we wanted to connect this with some of the leading scholars and experts and sheikhs and sheikhas of Sirah, particularly in the West. And so we're having a conference in Chicago at the end of this month. Okay. And what we've asked is we've chosen whether they're in academia or they're more prominent in the community. We've asked these experts to say, look, you guys are the leading names. Tell us a data set like this. In which area would you be interested in? So different academics and scholars have asked for different topics. And so we've sent them the data based on their topics of interest. We have someone looking at the Banu Qurayza incident, or the Jewish tribe Banu Qurayza, and then there's that controversial incident where a lot of them get persecuted, or I mean not persecuted, sorry, executed. Someone is doing that. Hani. Someone is a lot of focus. People are trying to focus on the Meccan phase. So Darul Arqam, speaking about secrecy, if I can use secrecy, according to many sources, that was the house that the companions, women and men, would gather in the first 6 years of the Prophet's life, and the Prophet would prophethood era, and he would give them instruction and teach them the Quran. And it was a bit of it wasn't very a public place. They would gather there secretly up to the conversion of Umar radiallahu anhu. That's the famous opinion. So someone's looking at that, finding so different episodes. And so these are experts in Sirah and scholars, and we've given them this data and they're analyzing it. Right. And hopefully they'll come to this conference, and it's only for scholars only, so they can freely and comfortably express their views. We want them to look at the data and tell us how much does it help, firstly present on the topics, but also see what is the role of looking for sources outside of the normal sources. So the Arabic name for this project was called Mashru' Tarikh Sirah min Ghayri Madaniha, the project of the history of Sirah from outside its normally expected sources. Mm-hmm. So looking at how beneficial it is to use other sources in general, and also this particular data set, and looking at the advantages and disadvantages together.
So, I mean, what kind of challenges can we expect, or can you expect, when trying to expand these available sources for Sirah? What kind of challenges?
Look, dealing with such data that perhaps hasn't been dealt with before provides a lot of chances of advantages and opportunities that makes it more relatable, but also some perhaps questions and difficulties, and that's really why scholars are needed. One is perhaps on authenticity, something that comes to my mind. How do you deal with different narrations? of different levels of authenticity. And obviously, sometimes the answer might be different answers. We might have different schools dealing with the how to deal with historical data. To speak from a very strictly hadith science perspective, Sirah was not always seen as the most authentic of the sciences. It was sometimes, perhaps because hadith had dealt more often with law, and anything that had legal ramifications always had more importance. So perhaps they'll have to look at that. How do we deal with different data that has different levels of authenticity? These are some of the challenges that they can come up with. But then there's other ones, more epistemological or philosophical. Sometimes what do we do when the Sirah tells us one thing, but our Islamic law might point us another way, because our Islamic law was built over 1400 years. So questions such as this are potential challenges. One last challenge might be, what if we don't have all the details? Like, we're looking for as much as we can, but maybe some things just have not survived.
Yeah, it's interesting here because you're applying technology now, the latest technology, to this vast corpus of work, and that is a new thing. It's amazing. And also, you're meeting in Chicago, and I know, again, it's not for the first time that cutting-edge Islamic scholarship is taking place within the English-speaking world and not within the Arabic world. And that, again, is a relatively new thing as well. It's no longer just happening within the heartland of Islam, but in other places, particularly America, of all places. So
hopefully these learning centers will become beacons of light in the future. If we have true research and true output, and obviously if we can fund some of these things, it'll be great. I listened to your podcast with Sheikh Mufti Muntasir Zaman and his book on Imam Bukhari. Very, very interesting, and that was happening in Dallas.
Yes, I know. You think of Dallas, you think of cowboys and stuff, but it's actually cutting edge Islamic scholarship as well. And this is the new world we live in, and all the better for it. I think it's absolutely amazing. Breaking down these binary polarities between them in the Muslim world and us in the West. Actually, no, some pioneering work is happening in the West as well as in the Muslim world. So this is
just to share something personal about that. Every Ramadan, recently I've tried performing itikaf in Ramadan. Where you spend 10 days at the mosque. Many of my teachers in different parts of the Islamic world, I speak to them and I mention, they say, "Oh, wow, you can do itikaf." I say, "Yeah, of course. Why?" And they say, "Well, sometimes in our own countries, we're not able to, because the intelligence agency, sometimes if we do something like that, we get listed in the wrong books, or the mosques are not even open sometimes." I can't speak openly, but some very major Muslim countries that we think are the major place of learning.
Oh, yes.
Major simple sunnahs cannot be practiced as freely as we can in the West.
This is a very, very profound and disturbing truth, actually. That often we can practice Islam in some ways that we can't in the so-called Muslim world, but and vice versa. We in the West, we can't say and do things because we get then labeled certain things which you can freely, obviously, in the Muslim world. So it's complicated, but yeah. So what do you plan to do with this data? What I mean, it's very good and fascinating and very worthwhile, but what's the end product and what are you going to do with this data?
Well, first of all, we want to have this data to be used primarily for research and scholarship.
Right.
And so this conference that I mentioned, the Sirah Hub conference in Chicago, is the first step that we're doing this, making it accessible to scholars. And sometimes you send one data and then the person requests, "Can you search this word as well? Can you search this word as well?" Right now, this data is not open. Even our scholars, they haven't been given open access to it. So hopefully we'll be hosting it at a particular website, something like we have Quran.com, Sunnah.com, maybe something that will have this data, at least first to researchers and then later on to others. There's other discussions that hopefully we'd like to have with the scholars at this conference. Things like some people are suggesting, can something like an encyclopedia come out of this, like a Sirah type encyclopedia? And this is just a something. But we've had people outside of the academia and like books, a group of university students and people with background in 3D animation and AI content creation. They've been involved and they've sought some help from this research, and some of the research committee members with them have been working with them. They're called Everstar Studios. Maybe I'll send you a website. You can put it at the bottom. And they've produced within a year, mainly on volunteer basis, some very interesting episodes of the Sirah using AI technology. You put on the Meta goggles with the 3D, and we had a bit of a launch. They had a bit of a launch, Everstar, at the ISNA convention recently in Dallas, where people can see episodes of the Sirah. They're also trying to design a game where they're rebuilding the Kaaba. Someone can play a game where they can rebuild the Kaaba.
Wow.
And also they're exploring with this, developing AI companions. For example, you see, or some of them are not companions, but figures of Sirah. So you might see Amr bin Hisham, Abu Jahl, and you might speak to him and say, "Who are you? Why do they call you Abu Jahl?"
Wow.
And he would strongly deny that. I've seen that they're testing with it now, because with this AI, it needs a lot of training. And some of it is very interesting. Obviously, I know some of these topics can be controversial. Some people prefer not to see these faces. For me personally, I love the series that was produced by the Middle East on the life of Sayyidina Omar radiallahu anhu. So I'm a fan of these type of development, but some people might not. But it allows children to speak to companions and then learn from them instead of reading books. And so there's many other applications beyond the academia. But the main one would be obviously for researchers and serious scholars.
Absolutely marvelous. Well, I really look forward to hearing more about this. It's a very exciting development, I think, in this, going beyond the normal sources for Sirah, finding fresh or not so fresh, but overlooked content, information, knowledge. Absolutely fascinating. So please keep us in touch with that. Maybe come back on after, inshallah, after the conference, which I think is the end of this month, isn't it? The 26th, 27th in Chicago, you say. Maybe remember, whatever, inshallah, you can come back and tell us about those developments. But
maybe we can share some of the highlights and with some of the scholars and presenters themselves, hopefully. Maybe.
Well, indeed. No, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's really important that we showcase this and spread word about it. Because it's always good to have fresh scholarship on this, actually. So, well, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Sadeq Ansari. I do want to mention, of course, you are the brother of Dr. Masheed Ansari, who has been a guest. She has been a guest on Blogging Theology as well. So your brother and sister, both from Afghanistan originally. You both got your PhDs. You're both Islamic scholars. You're both living in Australia. And you're both doing pioneering work. I mean, what a remarkable family that you come from, and what a blessing to the Ummah from Afghanistan to Australia. So that is a lovely thing to be aware of, folks, that we have two brother and sister. There are not any other members of your family with PhDs that are Islamic scholars. It's just the two of you.
Not from my immediate family, no.
Not your immediate family. Okay, so maybe with family. So a great blessing indeed. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we'll see you again, inshallah. So
inshallah. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. Thank you.
Walaikum assalam.